Françoise Girard. I'm now working at the Open Society Institute, originally from Canada, now living in the United States. What have I learned from this, and how will I use it in my work? I realize more than I thought, and this is because of all the reading of Foucault that I did and the thinking about how Foucault applied to the discourses that are used at the UN. I realized that, first of all, as Foucault recognized a long time ago, discourse itself is a site of engagement. So often we think at the UN that we're fighting for words because these words will be used to do something, but I realize even more that words matter in and of themselves. I think we always knew that, because you cannot fight for words year after year if you don't care about words. But they do matter because they mold reality, they shape reality. And that's their source of power, and that's what Foucault understood, and that my reading of him made that clear to me, and so that's very useful to me. And the second thing is that, in analyzing his construction of of how the West has constructed sexuality, you see that different categories, the perverse individual have been created, the hysterical woman, and the oversexed child that needs to be controlled, and so on. So it's important to attack each of these categories and deconstruct them and dismantle that. But that reinforced for me the need not only to fight these kinds of stereotypes, and in particular to fight homophobia, but also to really push for this universal concept of sexual rights, which in a way displaces the whole edifice of the stereotypes of Western sexuality. It sort of removes all that. We're not talking about women, we're not talking about children, we're not talking about perverse individuals or stereotypes of any kind. We're talking about sexual rights for all human beings. You asked me what were some of the most unexpected findings of the research. I have three. One is the finding, and this is in the context of the UN negotiations on sexuality in Beijing and at the Commission on Human Rights. What I realized, which I had not fully understood, is that progressive activists actually took the initiative every time to put sexuality on the table, to put sexual rights on the table. And I hadn't realized that because I was, when I joined this debate, it was at a moment where we were feeling the backlash of the right wing. And so there was a lot of talk about how we're reacting to the right wing or reacting to the conservatives. And so I was maybe under the impression, as were a lot of people, that in fact we were on the back foot and they were the ones who had taken the initiative. Looking at the events again, I realized that wasn't the case. In fact, feminist activists put sexual rights on the table, they put sexual orientation on the table as early as Cairo. And similarly, of course, the Brazilian resolution was put forward by progressives. The second thing I hadn't fully understood is the extent to which the Holy See, the representative of the Vatican at the United Nations, is the intellectual power behind a lot of the discourses of the right wing at the global level. Of course, I had seen them in action in negotiations, but I didn't quite understand how they were the ones, in fact, crafting the arguments about the importance of the family, the natural division of gender roles, and so on. And that came to me clearly when studying the Beijing case. I saw that, in fact, well before progressive activists had really thought seriously about issues of gender identity, the Holy See had thought about it. This is in 1995, and they had anticipated that eventually claims for gender identity would become very destabilizing. And so that's why they put out this attack against gender and the 5 genders. And obviously they'd read the sexuality literature much better than we had. So that, I think, re-emphasized the need to keep an eye on what the Holy See is doing, the writings they put out, and so on. And that I hadn't really fully understood. And conversely, the flip side of that is that I hadn't understood how spontaneous a lot of the action of progressive has been at the UN and at the global level. In other words, quite often we do things instinctively, and we know that sexual orientation should be on the table, and we put it there, but we haven't necessarily had those deep discussions across a broad range of activists to figure out what is our take on it, what is our critique of it, what are we going to do with it, what are the arguments that the right wing is going to put forward. So we do something very spontaneous, we just go for it, and then all kinds of things start to happen that we haven't necessarily anticipated. That was clear from the Brazilian resolution. The Brazilian diplomats themselves told me that they had not anticipated a lot of the arguments that were put forward against the resolution. So they just went for it, and then all kinds of things started to happen at the Commission they hadn't anticipated. And I think that was very symptomatic of the way in which we act. So how can these be used, these conclusions or these findings? I think it's obvious that we need to, I think it encourages me to continue to be proactive. The fact that we've gained so much by just daring to do it, being very bold, confirms that I think that's the way we should be. That's our natural way of being, evidently, and I think we should continue to just be courageous and bold and crazy and fight for utopian things at the UN. Of course, sometimes we have to prepare the ground a little better, so that's the second thing I think we should do as a result of these findings, is that spend a bit more time on analysis than we have. Maybe not everyone can reach the same level of analysis, but I think we need to put in place some little SWAT teams or little groups, working groups that need to think through these things so that we're prepared to react when we're attacked by the right wing after we've made our bold move.